Hi there, and welcome to Destiny Awaits, the podcast where we explore faith, identity, and purpose so you can step boldly into the life designed for you. I am your host, Andrea John, and here we keep it real. Authentic conversations, biblical insights, and stories of transformations that meet you right where you are. Each week, we uncover the truths that empower you to overcome limitations, embrace who God says you are, and live in alignment with His calling. Because your identity isn't about perfection, it's about wholeness, growth, and walking hand in hand with the one who created you. We are currently in a series called Jesus Speaks, where we dive deep into the Sermon on the Mount. This is not just a collection of teachings, it's an invitation to live a life that reflects who we truly are. In it, Jesus reveals how we uncover identity, discover our purpose, and step boldly into the destiny He's prepared for us. These words are transformative. They challenge us to examine our hearts, reshape our thinking, and align our lives with God's kingdom. And my prayer is that as we journey through this teaching together, you'll feel equipped, encouraged, and empowered to let your light shine. Let's dive in.
Okay, everyone, welcome to Destiny Awaits podcast. My name is Michael, and this is
Andrea.
And we are continuing our discussion on Matthew, specifically the Sermon on the Mount. And I believe we are at 5:21. 21, yes, you are right. Andrew, if you want to start us off and read what you have there in your version. What version are you reading? The Message?
The Message, which is what started this all.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so you're familiar with the command to the ancients, do not murder. I'm telling you that anyone who is so much as angry with a brother or sister is guilty of murder. Carelessly call a brother idiot, and you may find yourself hauled into court. Thoughtlessly yell stupid at a sister, and you are on the brink of hellfire. The simple moral fact is that words kill. This is how I want you to conduct yourself in these matters. If you enter your place of worship and are about to make an offering, you suddenly remember a grudge a friend has against you, abandon your offering, leave immediately, go to this friend, and make things right. Then and only then come back and work things out with God. Or say you're on the street and an old enemy accosts you. Don't lose a minute. Make the first move. Make things right with him. After all, if you leave the first move to him, knowing his track record, you're likely to end up in court, maybe even jail. If that happens, you won't get out without a stiff fine.
So, I think I'll go ahead and read it in the NET version as well.
Okay.
So you have heard that it was said to an older generation, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I say to you that anyone who is angry with a brother will be subjected to judgment, and whoever insults a brother will be brought before the council, and whoever says fool will be sent to fiery hell. So then, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled with your brother, and then come and present your gift. Reach agreement quickly with the accuser while on the way to court, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the warden, and you will be thrown in prison. I tell you the truth, you will never get out of there until you have paid the last penny. It's kind of a interesting set of verses. I've heard some crazy teachings in relation to this. What is your thoughts, especially, starting in 21 there, you have heard that it was said to an older generation, do not murder. Okay, obviously referring to the Ten Commandments, right?
Right, yep.
And whoever murders will be subject to judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But then Jesus says, "But I say to you that anyone who is angry with a brother will be subject to judgment." And even goes as far as insulting a brother would be brought before the council. Okay, he mentioned the word fool. Obviously not the English word fool, but he mentions the word fool will be sent to a fiery hell. What is he talking about here? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first we have to remember what we just went over, right? Just before it, Jesus talks about how he didn't come to abolish the law but fulfill it, right?
Right.
And really what he's doing here is he's going through this, as well as all the other things that we're going to come up against, is explain to us what that looks like. He's not here to abolish it. He's not here to tell you it's wrong. Now, a lot of scholars and theologians and stuff, they refer to this as the antithesis statement, right? Antithesis is against. It's the opposition. Some translations even have, but I say, they have that transitional word but.
Yes.
However,
King
but
James
is actually not in the original transcripts.
Right.
So while I understand what they're saying, because the reality is this is the first of where it says, Jesus says, you have heard. So we're about to go through 6 you have heards, followed up by I say. So instead of looking at it as antithesis, I see it as Jesus is coming to explain God's heart on the matter. What is God saying in this case? Jesus obviously speaking as God. So I just wanted to set the stage because Jesus is about to explain himself and explain a little bit more about the law and God's heart behind the law. So here, obviously, the first thing we see is that it refers to the ancients. So it's talking about these things came long before.
Right.
Right? These commandments were long before. And there was a time where I would say it was impossible to follow the law. And then there was a time where I'd say, well, Jesus said it was possible to be righteous, so there must have been a possibility.
Right.
And now I kind of have swapped back, but from a different perspective. So for us, for example, for me and you in this time, the 21st century, it is impossible for us to follow the law because we would not physically be able to do some of the things the law says. Like, not only is it culturally irrelevant, some of it is even illegal in our country, right? So, like, we can't go and sacrifice animals and stuff like that. So, I just, leaving that out there. But he's referring to do not murder. So that's the first one. This is something we all know, right? It's in the 10 Commandments, is extremely basic.
Right.
Do not kill another human being. Something that the reality is should not even need to be said. It's ingrained in us that we shouldn't do this. Think about back to Cain and Abel. Cain knew he did something wrong.
Right.
He was not motivated by God. He was motivated by himself. And actually, Cain is a perfect example of what Jesus is saying here, because he's saying, if you're just angry with someone, you are guilty of murder. So what does yours say? So hold on. So in there it says guilty of murder. But I say, if you are even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. So there's some things missing because I'm reading from the NLT. What does yours say?
Which verse?
Verse 22.
But I say to you that anyone who is angry with a brother will be subjected to judgment.
Okay. So what's missing here and what's in the original and in N.T. Wright's translation, it's there. I'm surprised at how NET
does put it in the footnotes.
Okay, so what's supposed to be there is you will go before the Sanhedrin, which is basically like the Supreme Court.
Yes.
So it starts off by saying, you have heard it said to the ancients, if you commit murder, you will go and have judgment. Basically what it's saying, you're going to go to court.
It also says without a cause.
Well, yes, I'm going to get to that. But
Okay.
so it says if you commit murder, you will go before the court. That's what the original Greek transcripts say.
Right.
Okay. So it's using the term judgment very broadly, but it says you're going to go to court. Then it says, but I say to you, if you are angry with your brother or sister, you're going to go before the Sanhedrin. So now it's kind of like, okay, so we all know if you commit murder, you're going to go to court. But I'm saying to you that if you are even angry with someone, you're going to go to the Sanhedrin, which at that time it was like the Supreme Court.
Right.
Like you're going to go to an even higher court. It's worse than if you were to murder someone. So one of the things I noticed in all of the transcripts, every single translation rather, is that there's a little asterisk or some footnote, and they all say that in some of the transcripts, there is a statement missing, which is without cause. So it's basically saying if you're angry with someone without cause, that's the bad thing. That's where it's equivalent to murder.
Yeah.
So that was a huge distinction. A lot of translations don't put it because as it's almost like equal. They don't know, did someone omit or did someone add? So out of abundance of caution, they have left out without cause. But in the Young's Literal, which is not, you don't read Young's Literal for readability.
No.
You read it, it's a literal, Young's Literal. It is a literal word for word translation. So it's missing a lot of transitional words and stuff like that we have in the English language. It does say without cause. So
Right.
he did.
Do you have the Young's Literal with you?
I have it. No, it's on my phone.
I could pull it up. So, then he says, so do you really think Jesus means if you just get angry with someone, he's now going to send, you should go before the council
like
just
worse.
for being angry?
So
what does that look like in today's world? What do you think is going on there?
I'm going to share a little bit about my opinion and my perspective based on all the study that I have done about this very topic. And it goes back to, and I have said this in my personal life so many times, there are moments where people will attempt to or actually kill someone with their words, or they do something to destroy another person. They may not
like
have
slander.
Yeah, like they may not have killed the person physically, but they are killing the person in every other sense that in reality matters, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. There are people who, if you think about someone who psychologically or emotionally abuses another individual,
Right.
that is what this is talking about. It's not just...
So this isn't just somebody, you got road rage, or you got upset because someone cut you off, or somebody called you a name so you got mad at them. This is beyond that. Is that what you're saying?
No, it can be that too, because it all goes back to the intention of the heart. What is your heart feeling in the moment? Because the reality is that sometimes road rage can literally turn into murder, right? Like, what's the intention? What are you thinking? What is that anger producing? Because if in that moment you were to wish the person dead,
yeah,
that's what it's very convicting.
Well, let me read it in Young's Literal. It says, "But I say to you that everyone who is angry at his brother without cause shall be in danger of judgment, and whoever may say to his brother, 'Empty fellow,' shall be in danger of Sanhedrin, and whoever may say, 'Rebel,' shall be in danger of Gehenna, of the fire."
Yes. Okay. So let's move on a little bit.
Empty
because
fellow would be like you're
a good for nothing.
You're good. You're absolutely worthless. It's not even fool.
Yes.
It's saying you have no value.
So let's move on so then we can bring it together. So when the intention here is basically saying, when you tell someone you're a good for nothing, you have no purpose. What good are you?
Or if you treat someone like they're good for nothing.
Exactly. You have contempt for that person. That's you putting yourself in God's place. You are now placing a value or devalue on a human being who is made in the image of God. I feel like that's what Jesus is trying to say here. It's when you are assigning a value or devalue to a human being, saying you're worthless, you're worth nothing. And think about this, when we do it to kids.
Yeah.
When we treat our children like they have no value because they're not adults, they can't reason. What do you know? You don't know anything. And you treat kids that way. And then we wonder why they have low self-esteem, why they have no confidence, because they've been raised to believe that they're good for nothing. What good are you? You're just a kid. You don't know anything. You haven't, and that's what kills. That kills so many people. In my personal life, there are times where I have felt that. And I'm sure that there's people listening who will identify with this. It feels like you're being silenced, but more so suffocated. Yeah. You're being suffocated to death.
Yeah, I think if what Jesus is ultimately referring to is love, then the opposite of love is not just hate, it's utter contempt. It's you're nothing, no value whatsoever. One of the biggest things that Christianity brought to the world was adding value to human life.
Yeah.
It was not something that existed. Most humans that were not of a very specific, if you weren't part of a specific family or group of people, you had no value. And if there was something wrong with you, you really had no value. If you were a slave, you had no value. Most women had no value. Christianity brought value to every human being on the earth. And to say you're nothing, you're empty, like Young's Literal is saying, is to say you have no value. Therefore, you're not worthy of love, which is the opposite of what Jesus would have taught. And I think you should be at risk of going before the Sanhedrin. And a lot of what Jesus was saying here is that you should be at risk of that, but you may not be.
It's not literal. Jesus is making a point here.
Yeah, he's definitely making a point.
And so much so that the next example Jesus gives is another paradox where now he's saying if you just call someone a fool or an idiot, you're now going to go into some places say hell, fiery hell. The actual reference is Gehenna, which we'll talk about because I want to talk specifically about that word. But here if we just, before we get into that conversation, look at this as, okay, now it's this divine judgment. Okay, now it's escalated. So first we start off with murder and you're in the lower court. Then we go into anger or contempt and you're in a higher court. And now it actually seems like less of an issue, like just insulting someone. But now that's like divine judgment.
Now you're going to hell.
Yeah. And it's crazy. And I think with this and with some other things that we're going to see in the Sermon on the Mount, but also throughout the teachings of Jesus, it becomes very clear that one, Jesus loves to paint pictures, which is why he speaks in parables. There are things that Jesus says that are not meant to be taken literal, right? Like when in a few passages, he's going to talk about cutting your right arm off.
Right.
I don't think he wants you to cut your right arm off. I think he was making a drastic statement to alert us, to like wake us up to think about something logically, right? So now he's saying, okay, if you call someone, you insult someone stupid, because it's all tied to contempt.
Yeah.
When you're looking at someone with absolute hatred, and I have to say, like, I have felt that. I have had, I'll just use the term people, in front of me and can feel the hate and the contempt spewing off of their body. And you can feel like in that moment, if they could, they probably would end you.
Well, think about John the Baptist, why he got killed.
Why did he get killed?
Because he said something against the leadership.
Well, John the Baptist. Did you just say John the Baptist? For some reason, I was thinking about the disciple John. Never mind.
John the Baptist.
Yes.
He spoke against the leadership, and
Right.
he wouldn't retract.
Yeah.
He spoke against the king.
And he would double down.
And he would double down, and he did it over and over again, and it eventually cost him his life.
Right.
And it was just words. He never actually physically did anything to them.
Right.
He just called them names like empty one and fool.
Now.
And worse.
Okay. Well, hold that thought, because we're going to get into the topic of hell a little bit, just touch it a little bit.
Yeah.
And we're going to come back to that.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm going to need you to remind me. Let me write it down just so I don't forget. But we'll go back to that. And then the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah. But think about with John the Baptist. First he was brought before judgment, right?
Mm-hmm.
They warned him to be quiet, stop talking.
Yep.
And then that didn't work. And so then they brought him before the council. That didn't work. And so that they locked him up. They put him in jail.
Well, then he spoke against Herod.
He spoke against Herod.
And
They threw him
Herod
in
didn't
jail.
even want to, Herod didn't want to take the measures he did. It was a request from someone, and he was obligated to fulfill that request.
But if you read, he went through all that. He went before the judge. He went before the warden.
So
got
was he
thrown in
wrong?
jail, and then he was
Was
killed.
John the Baptist filled
No,
with
but
anger?
what I'm pointing out is that there was a context there that doesn't exist today.
Yes. The audience, the
To-
people sitting in front of Jesus would have understood exactly what he was saying.
Yeah, because if you spoke out against them, they would kill you.
Yeah.
If you said the wrong words, they would kill you.
Right.
Everything Jesus taught eventually got him killed.
Mm-hmm.
So their freedom of speech was not something that existed during that time.
Absolutely not.
So we have to keep that in mind
Right.
when we teach on this stuff.
It was a very
Because
different
if I walk
culture.
down the street and I can look right at a police officer and go, "You fool," and if he's having a bad day, he might arrest me. But that's about as far as it's going to go.
But what Jesus was saying, see, this is the thing what Jesus is saying, are you really going to go to court for calling someone a fool? No. This is where divine judgment comes in.
Back then,
God is looking at your heart.
I understand what Jesus' point was, but back then you could.
Depending who you were calling a fool.
Right.
Depending who you were calling a fool, yeah. Okay, so let's get into this topic of hell, because this is the first time that we see hell introduced in the New Testament period.
So let me ask you about that. So we have in end of verse 22, it says, "Whoever says thou fool," or in Lung's literal, empty fellow, "thou shalt be in danger and shall be sent to fiery hell." Or in this case, in the NET, it says, "Whoever says fool will be sent to fiery hell." So what do you think he's talking about there? Is he really talking about throwing everyone in hell who says fool?
Well, it depends what your definition of hell is. So that's what I wanted to talk about.
What is their definition? What is he talking about right here?
Well, one, the word used in Greek is Gehenna.
Correct. And
Okay.
in Hebrew, it's hinam, which is the same thing. Valley
Yes,
of Hinnom.
we in English have translated that word to mean hell. The Greek word is a transliteration of the word Gehenna in Hebrew.
That's right.
So transliteration just means...
Gehenna is Greek.
No, actually, Gehenna is a Hebrew term. It is
A Greek transliteration.
transliteration to Greek, which
Right.
all that means is we're using the same word, just using Greek letters.
Mm-hmm.
So calling it Gehenna in English is us saying it's an English transliteration of the Greek that's a transliteration of the Hebrew. So in essence, the word Gehenna is the same word in Hebrew. Why the heck does this matter?
So what happens if I get thrown into Gehenna? What is Gehenna? Where is this place at?
Well, that's what we need to talk about, because conventional Christianity, evangelical Christianity, whatever it is that you want to call it today, believes that hell is an eternal afterlife location. So it's underneath the earth somewhere is what we, if we do the picture, it's underneath earth somewhere. It's filled with fire, and it's where people, what Christians believe, it's where people who don't know Jesus are going to live for eternity. So once you die, or the world ceases to exist, depending on what your apocalyptic beliefs are, you will live in this place of torment and fire for eternity. Okay?
Right.
That's what evangelical Christianity has morphed this term into. And I say morphed because this was not the understanding that the early Christians had of that word. So Gehenna was a literal location that was in existence. You will see it mentioned even in the Old Testament. I think Ezra mentions it. I forgot the other Kings. So in Kings, in Ezra,
Yep.
the story around
Jeremiah.
the valley of Gehenna is referenced. Meaning, what I mean by that is, it literally explains how Gehenna began and what it was used for. In Jeremiah, in Jeremiah, God references it in a prophetic word through Jeremiah about what's going to happen to the people who essentially started Gehenna. So this is my understanding. I know you have a different understanding. I'm going to let you explain that, because that is a thought. But what you have is, there has not been any, I don't know what the writings are. So I'm going to speak to what I know, and what I know is in the Bible. Okay. So in the Bible, there were these, I think they were Judeans, and this guy actually named Gehenna. So I don't know the actual Jewish names. I'm just going to keep using the term Gehenna. So there's a guy, Gehenna. He buys a piece of land. It's in a valley. It's the valley of Gehenna.
Correct.
Okay. So he gets the land. He winds up kind of building on it, and they start to burn incense. And this incense is used to worship numerous deities. I think particularly the gods of the stars.
Well, it was the god of Molech.
Okay. So they did worship Yahweh,
Yeah.
but they were also worshiping this, and they kind of made that mockery.
Not just incense either. Human sacrifices were done to the
Well,
god of
yes.
Molech.
So then it kind of morphed into, they started doing child sacrifice.
Yes.
And they were because those gods required child sacrifice.
Right.
Then this guy, let's call him Gehenna because I don't know how to pronounce his name in Hebrew, he dies, and the land goes to his son, which is why in modern day during Jesus' time.
So that's how they named the valley. Gehenna.
Yes, it's the valley of the son of Gehenna, or something like that, right? So
Right.
he continued it and actually increased the idol worship in the valley, and it became like they were worshiping all sorts of gods. Child sacrifice only increased, and it almost became norm. So now they were worshiping Yahweh, they were worshiping the God, but they were worshiping all these gods like it was okay. Kind of like
Wow.
the term all roads lead. All roads lead to, right? And in Jeremiah, God comes in and says, basically, I am going to get rid of all of you, because look at what you have done. And this is me totally paraphrasing, so hopefully I'm not butchering, but like, look at what you've done.
Yeah, if someone wants to go read it themselves, it's Jeremiah chapter 7, 31, 19, 5 and 6, and chapter 32, verse 35.
Okay, so go check it out, and I'll put it in the show notes too. I'll put the reference in Kings and Ezra too, so you can go look it up, because I know this is we're going to just quickly touch on this, but this is a big hot topic because of what we've been taught our whole lives, right? So I know this is like touching on something that maybe like, what the heck are y'all talking about? It's something that I've known about for a long time, but to you, it may be the first time and it may be freaking you out. So I completely understand that, and I'll put the references to it. And if you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out and ask. But God said, like, I'm going to get rid of all you people. And this was right before Babylon went and captured the Israelites and all that stuff. Well, what happened was, what God was saying, okay, this is where the golden rule comes in. God basically in the prophecy was like, okay, I don't want to do this, but if you guys don't change, what's going to happen is you are all going to be destroyed, and this same place that you created to kill people, to child sacrifice, to worship other idols, will become the same place where you end up. You will end up in that fiery hell.
Well, they did.
And they did, right? Because they didn't change their way. God's approach to Israel was always like, this is what's going to happen. I don't want to, and that's not what I want to happen. If you just turn to me, you'll be saved.
Because in 70 AD, that's where they threw all the bodies
into Gehenna.
Yeah.
So, but also what we don't know is, so Jeremiah gave that prophecy.
Right.
Right? What we have no writings or evidence of is that place used once there was a bunch of Israelites slaughtered by Babylon. Were they thrown into Gehenna? Because that's what God said was going to happen. Now think about this. There's the golden rule that we're going to get to, which is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But what happens when what you do unto others is something bad? Will it not happen to you?
Yeah.
Is that not what we're going to get
Reaping
into
and sowing.
too? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not the law? We're going to get into that in the, coming up. But just to show how all of this connects, God in that moment was saying, so all of that to say, this place that we have been told hell is, actually is a literal place that exists until today. So if you go to Jerusalem,
on the south side,
there is this place exists. So again, I know that to some of you, this may be a little bit shocking, mind-blowing, scary, because what does this mean? It's okay. Don't become overwhelmed by this if it's the first time you've heard it. I just pray and ask God to show you. I always say this, don't take our word for it. You need to understand things yourself. We're just here to enlighten, to help, to bring to you the things that we have learned.
We're also not taking on every time it mentions hell, right, in the New Testament, right?
Yes, we're not taking on, yeah.
We're talking about this particular point.
Because also Gehenna is mentioned about 12 times, I think, in the New Testament, if I remember correctly. I think almost every time by Jesus. And there are, John doesn't mention it at all. And Paul never writes about it.
Yeah.
So, now me personally, I did learn some new things recently just diving into this that, like, I kind of knew but never dove into, but now I actually want to, because I want to look at what are those 12 times, in what context.
Yeah, they're not
are they
all
being
Gehenna.
used?
Some of them are Hades. Hades is the place of the dead.
Okay.
It's where your spirit goes, and where it always went, even prior to Jesus.
Okay.
And it was the place of the dead. It doesn't necessarily mean Gehenna. They're two. You have to look each time. We just took Gehenna and we took Hades, and
translated it to hell.
In the English world, we just put hell there, and with very little description, and it fit the evangelical narrative very well. So nobody paid any attention to how much it affected the meaning of Scripture.
Right.
In a very bad way, actually.
Well, and it's because of the way, and this whole concept that we have of hell, the eternal fiery place that people go to after death, the place of torment, is fairly new in terms of, from, even from the world of Christianity, I would say. This is not something that Jewish people believe or subscribe to, because it wasn't even what Jesus subscribed to.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a new concept that they came up with, the church came up with. But then you also have, and we won't go through all of them today, but you have Gehenna, you have Hades, then you have Lake of Fire, and then you have Hades dumping off into the Lake of Fire, and which is kind of how the evangelicals got justified turning every word to hell, because they just said, okay, well, if it's Hades and eventually it dumps off into the Lake of Fire, so therefore everyone ends up in that version of hell anyways. Mm-hmm. And so that was how they justified it.
Okay.
But it is not, it definitely changes the context when you look at each verse and you understand what's going on here. I mean, so they used it as a dumping place, and there's another verse where it says where the worm dieth not. Mm-hmm. And that particular verse, they are talking about Gehenna again. And the reason why the worm dieth not is because the bodies keep getting dumped. So I had a classic example of this happen with a garbage can the other day. I kept putting stuff into a garbage can, okay? And the garbage can got filled with maggots.
Yes, because because you put things into a garbage can without a bag. It isn't, you and Anna, it is infuriating.
But anyways, I kept putting in the can, and I kept thinking, well, once the maggots get done eating the stuff, they will die, because I looked up, okay, how long do they live? Not very long.
Wow.
They actually die within a very short amount of time. So instead of me cleaning the garbage can, I just figured I would starve them to death, because that's the right thing to do. The problem is that we kept putting stuff into the garbage can, kept giving the maggots more stuff to eat.
Can you clarify
Therefore, the maggots,
Can you clarify the we? Who is we?
Everyone kept doing it. Yes.
Okay. In our garbage can, everyone was putting
Everyone was doing it, yes.
Okay.
And yes, you would put it into bags, but maggots can get in bags, and they would go get the stuff anyways.
Okay.
So the maggots just kept growing, and they kept multiplying. Uh-huh. And there was more of them because the food never stopped.
Right.
Every time we would dump the bags in the garbage can, we'd bring it down to the street, the garbage man would dump it in, I'd look down in the can, there's full of maggots again. Why? It constantly had food. Well, Valley of Gehenna is the same thing. The worm, the maggot, mm-hmm. If you look at original context, it shows that worm that it's talking about is the maggots. And the worm never died because they continued to throw bodies mm-hmm. into the Valley of Gehenna. That's how fast they were dying. And when 70 AD happened and Jerusalem got sacked, there were so many people dying during that period, because first they were surrounded, right? And they were starved, and so a lot went wrong, and a lot of them died long before the Jerusalem actually went down. So there were so many people dying that the worm didn't die. It just kept, they were dying so fast, they just kept adding bodies. So after thinking that through one day, I realized that I was creating my own little Valley of Gehenna in the garbage can. So I stopped, emptied the garbage can, stopped using it, and just set the can aside. Didn't let anything go in it, and they all died. I didn't even have to clean the garbage can because it ate everything in there, mm-hmm. and then the maggots died. The maggots cleaned the garbage can.
Right.
So, yeah, kind of an interesting story. Then I bleached it. But...
But, yeah, so I had read that that whole part too. I had taken notes before that I forgot I had taken. So, yeah, it became a place where human excrement and rubbish, so garbage,
yep.
was disposed of.
Yep.
And it wound up becoming, during Jesus's time, like before Jesus, a little bit before Jesus, like not just his time, but around that time period, it wound up being symbolically used as a place of divine punishment.
Yeah, it became a like an idiom.
Yes.
Like we have idioms today.
Right.
Right? So that would be an example of that.
Yep. And for those of you who keep hearing us say the word idiom, if you're not familiar with what that word means, it's just a saying. Like What's another word
It's
for it?
it's a pop culture saying. It's something that you understand because you're living it during this time, and you
Right.
watch the news, understand movie references or something like that, or things people say, right? Could be generational, and you just make those statements, and nobody. If anyone was not living during our time and didn't understand it, and they went back and read it, they'd be very confused.
Well, yeah, like today, the kids are very big into idioms because of social media.
Yeah.
So someone will do a video, and then something that has nothing to do with anything will become a saying the kids say out of reference. So, for example, I know this is a little bit of an older one, but like, I'm just Joshin.
Right.
Who is Josh, and what does Joshin mean?
Or they'll say no cap.
No cap, yeah.
Which means they're telling the truth.
Right.
Well,
and
how
it's
in
from
the world would anyone future generation know what no cap means?
Exactly, because it came from social media, so it becomes all this stuff. Somebody said something, and then it just stuck.
So let's look at 23 then. I think we've talked enough about.
Yeah. So now what's about to happen is Jesus is going to give some stories to highlight, and I thought I finally was able to kind of connect some dots here that I was like, oh, I get it. So Jesus is saying here in 23, so if you are presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar, go and be reconciled to that person, then come and offer your sacrifice to God. And I've always looked at this like, wow, even if someone has something against you, like it's not that you have something against someone, it's someone has something against you. And I always was like, that's kind of intense, because sometimes we don't know someone has something against us, right? Like we have no idea. But then when we go back and you look at what we just read, what we just talked about, we think about the golden rule, you understand the reference of Gehenna and what Jesus was saying, because we have to put ourselves in the position. Last week we mentioned, and someone made a comment on the YouTube channel too, because I think we used the wrong term. Jesus was speaking to those people. He was not speaking to me and to you. So he wasn't speaking to Andrew and to Mike.
Right.
Now, the scriptures are for us, but they weren't written to us. And in order to properly interpret and have proper exegesis, we must remember who the author was, who was saying what, who were the people there, what would they have known. It's like all this stuff, right?
Right.
So we have to remember who Jesus was talking to. We also, which I always talk about context, look at what was Jesus saying? How was he saying it? What comes before? What comes after? And here Jesus just gave this example, and he didn't explain it because I believe that he knew the people who were listening would have known what Gehenna was. They would have seen the contrast. They would have seen like Jesus's bold statements that he was making. Like the least offensive things seem to have the higher punishment or judgment. So then I realized, oh my gosh, what Jesus is saying here, if you hurt someone, called someone a good for nothing, insulted someone, publicly shamed someone, went against someone's innate value and caused them to have something against you, they have something against you because you did these things.
Yeah.
Leave your stuff at the altar and go deal with it. Don't come to God. God can't fix your problem.
Yeah.
Go to your brother and sister.
Yeah, you created the problem, right?
Right.
So you bring your gift to the altar, and you remember that your brother has something against you. You're supposed to leave your gift there in front of the altar and first go be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your gift. Now, one beautiful thing about the Jewish world is that was possible. Today, it's not always possible. Most people don't allow you to have any sort of reconciliation.
It can be hard, yeah. So explain what you mean by how the Jewish people have. I know they have a holiday.
Yeah, they have
right?
a holiday, and I'm not going to get into the specific meaning of all of it, but essentially, in today's terms, it would be like if we all had a giant party in a specific day where we all gathered together and everybody asked for forgiveness.
And we all just reconciled with one, like, let everything go.
Well, it doesn't really matter if you forgive me or not. I don't care about that.
But I ask for forgiveness.
I ask for forgiveness. Okay.
What's
you
the holiday
forgive
called?
Me. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's Shiva, but I'd have to check to be sure.
Yeah, I don't remember.
But I think it's Shiva. And I forgot I was going to pull that up, but I forgot. But they have a specific day that they do that, and they do that every year, and it's a very big deal. And in the Jewish world, that was it's so important. Even today, even the rabbinic Jews do it, and it's a very big deal. It's very healthy, and it's something completely missing in the Christian culture and evangelical world. They do not understand forgiveness like they should. They don't make the effort to go and reconcile and forgive one another. And it's funny because if they did, their lives would be completely changed.
Oh, yeah.
Like if they actually lived it out the way the Jewish people did, it would have be much better for them.
Well, because let's look back to what Jesus was saying about anger, right? Think about contempt. If we brew in this unforgiveness, whether we caused it or not, or whether we're the ones offended or not, if you brew in that contempt, it's going to lead to anger. You're going to desire evil things against someone. And, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm guiltless in this. This is very convicting for me because I have enemies.
Yeah.
And in serious enemies. And I had to take a serious look. I mean, like I've mentioned, I'm reading this every day. And I have to take a serious look at myself and say, okay, it's about the heart.
And in the Jewish world, they didn't really, that's why it was not about reconciliation or forgiveness. It was about asking.
Yeah. Acknowledging.
Yeah.
To me, it's like I'm acknowledging that I did something wrong. And whether you forgive me or not, that's up to you. We're going to talk about what happens when you don't forgive someone, right? So it's up to you. But for me, I must confess. I must say, you want to say apologize or repent or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because I've always seen that as, someone has something against you, whether you did something or not. And now I realize in context, like, no, it's actually that person is hurt by you. It's your fault. You did something to cause it.
In this case, yeah. And also, I think Jesus is doing something else here because I remember one time I was in a church and the whole church was singing, I love you, Lord. I worship you, Lord. We are doing all these songs, and I heard something. I don't know if it was the Spirit or if it was myself or something, and I heard it really clear, and it really disturbed me. And it said, basically what I heard was, why are you wasting your time praying about how you love the Lord, you worship the Lord, and all this stuff, when you treat those around you like garbage, basically.
Right.
And he was like, many of this, and he just was like, that's the issue right now. Christians think it's okay to just say, I worship you, Lord, I love you, Lord, and we have all these songs about that. And they're sitting right next to people. Because I was in this room and I was thinking about, okay, that person hates that person, says all kinds of evil things about that person. They have no intention of reconciling.
Mm-hmm.
They have been backbiting, lying, and making up stories for years about each other. And they're both on their knees saying they worship the Lord.
Right.
And to me, God was looking right back at them going, get it right with each other, then come back to me.
Yep.
Don't even bother singing these songs to me.
Mm-hmm.
Don't even bother worshiping me, because if you can't love one another, then you don't love me. So don't lie to me anymore.
It's lack of righteousness, right standing with God and others. You can't forsake others for God. Like, that's not how it works. They're so intricately tied together.
And I think that's what Jesus is doing here too. He's saying, he's elevating, because they all knew, love the Lord thy God.
Right.
but they didn't understand love your neighbor.
Right.
They didn't get that part.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is saying to love your neighbor, if you're not willing to do that, then you're automatically not loving the Lord your God.
He's literally saying, leave your sacrifice at the altar.
Don't even worship me.
Right. Go deal with that and then come back.
Yeah, don't worship me.
And I'll just say this, and this is a conversation for another day. Not every situation will result in reconciliation and restoration of trust. Okay? So that's not what we're saying here. But really the heart of what Jesus is saying here is, if we were to just be more intentional and careful with the words that we say and our intentions and our heart towards people, we won't have to deal with that. Like, why not prevent finding yourself in that situation?
Yeah.
And then it goes on to give the example of court. Like, if you're on the way to court, make sure that you fix things, like negotiate outside of court, because if not, you're going to go to court and you're going to find yourself guilty and having to deal with all of that. And this is something that I am so absolutely familiar with and have to deal with all the time. And again, there's a place where fixing it outside court logistically doesn't always work, but then I have to be reminded, well, court didn't necessarily work the same way back then as it did here. I have this feeling that I don't fully understand the context of what's being spoken here. And in all the studying I did, I didn't hear anyone really explain much about this portion.
Because sometimes you want court.
You need
actually deal with it.
Yeah.
Because someone becomes so unreasonable. But that's not what Jesus is talking about here.
You're right.
He's not talking about the exceptions to the rule. He's talking about
The
people
rule,
that
yes.
are walking in relationship with one another.
Yep.
Okay. This is about the family of God. He's talking to Jewish people who are already in community with one another. That's why they're going before the Sanhedrin. Because if they weren't in community with each other, he'd be talking about them going before Rome. Okay?
Yeah, very true.
Different program, different game.
You're supposed to be a family.
When we're dealing with people outside of family, outside of community, sometimes the law, it's necessary.
Right.
You know, you actually want the judge's decision.
Not everyone lives according to the laws of God. And when I say the laws of God, I use that very loosely, like the principles of God and the way God wants us to live, right?
Like love one another as he is.
Right.
Us.
Like, and what that looks like. So, I remember years ago, I had prayed a lot about repentance, and I asked God to reveal to me what repentance would look like. In every situation, it's going to look a little bit different. But the core of what he taught me was, when someone truly recognizes that they have done wrong, they will always be willing to apologize and understand if they are not forgiven.
Yeah, and
because they understand the pain that they caused, and that you now have released. You have kind of like, okay, that person is hurt. Like, let's say I hurt you and I ask for forgiveness, right? And for me to impose, you must forgive me. God says you have to forgive me, and I throw it in your face.
Okay.
Well,
I forgive you.
That's a very selfish thing to do, because now what I'm saying is, in order for me to feel okay, you're forgiven, you need to give me forgiveness. Mm-hmm. That's not the principles of God. If you repent,
oh man, because I thought that was
no.
Because the other day I said something that was rude, and Alicia was pretty hurt.
Yeah,
and so then I told her I was sorry, and then I said, will you forgive me? And she was like, no, and I was like. Well, it was all about me.
True story.
I just needed her to forgive me.
Right.
It was all about me, right?
Right.
So then I just kept begging her to forgive me until she did. It was just a dumb comment I made, but it was a big deal to her. Not as big a deal to me.
Yeah.
But I asked her to forgive me, and then she said no, and then but I couldn't force her to forgive me.
Right. You tried to,
but
that didn't work.
That didn't work. So then I just dropped it. And like a few minutes later, before she went to bed, she was like, hey, by the way, I forgive you. And, and that suddenly felt a lot better.
Well, but this is the thing, and you will feel better because our instinct is to want people to like us. And if you love someone and you really didn't have bad intention, you want them to know that, right? Like, it just makes you feel good. And I understand that. But what happened, like, that's a very simple and small example, but you asked her for forgiveness. You tried to make her, didn't work. But when you gave her time to think about it, she was able to process the forgiveness and be like, okay, I mean, I'm just going to forgive him. Like, why am I going to hold on to this? It's not going to do me any good.
Yeah,
I know
she
Alicia
literally said, I hold grudges very well.
But she came out, and I think that's what happens. Like, God showed me that, and it's something that I've lived by. And even when I've asked someone for forgiveness, like, I know that I hurt someone, even if it was unintentional, but I recognize, okay, I didn't mean to, but I understand that I did, and I understand where you're coming from. I'm sorry. And if you don't forgive me, then that's okay. Because what matters is me and God. Like, I know that I did what I had to do, and I did what God would have wanted me to do. How the person responds is up to them, not up to me.
That's right.
So I went, I did, and now I can go back to the altar.
Yeah.
Blameless. Because I have lived according to what Jesus has taught.
So in conclusion, we shouldn't go and try to move this 100% into our context in our world and try to live by this as a rule.
What do you mean?
Like if I call someone a fool, I'm not going to hell.
No, again, it has to be the intention of the heart. This is not me. This is not you saying something silly like you say all the time, or doing something silly and me being like, you're such an idiot. He's such an idiot. Like, I say that all the time, like, oh my gosh, such an idiot, whatever. Right? Like, no, that's the heart behind it is you're devaluing a person. You're saying you are worth nothing. You don't matter. It's better if you don't exist. Yeah. Or you literally, like, you are upset with someone, you are angry, and you try to destroy the person. And that's what Jesus is talking about. It's not about the word you use. It's not that you say fool or you say idiot. It's about the intention of the heart. Are you looking at someone and saying, you're good for nothing, you don't matter, I'm better than you, you're going to hell, you shouldn't exist,
yeah,
and you should be gone?
So for you to get to the point where you murder someone, let's work this in reverse for a moment. Here's another way to look at this. If you look at murder, for example, okay, I think possibly part of what Jesus is saying here is that for you to get to the point where you murder someone, you either have to think they're worthless, or you have to be very angry with them, and to where you're out of control, right?
Well, yes.
Not willing to forgive at all, right? And he's saying if you can get rid of the insults, the anger, and just reconcile with people, you'll never reach the point of murder. Exactly.
It's a precursor. So all these things that Jesus is saying is like, it's a precursor that leads to murder. So is like Jesus, when we talk about antithesis, it's not like Jesus said, you've heard the ancients say, do not murder or you'll experience judgment. But I say to you, it's okay. That's not what Jesus was saying.
Right.
Jesus was like, let me explain to you what murder really looks like.
He's trying to explain intentionality. He's trying to explain about
the heart.
It's starting in the heart. Heart, when we see the heart in Scripture, what does that mean? What does that translate in your mind? When
intention.
You see heart.
To me, it's intention. Okay. It's like the Bible talks how many times about how the heart is the spring head of life. It's where everything flows. What's in your heart will come out, right?
Yeah.
When I hear that, when I see that, when I apply that, to me, it's intention. Mm-hmm. What's the intention?
Yeah. See, one theologian called it the seat of desire.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Anytime you see that in Scripture, that's what you're looking at.
So murder, even Cain, right? It was planned. There was contempt in his heart against Abel. He was angry. He was jealous. He wanted what Abel had. And he let that grow.
Right?
Yeah, he let that grow to the point where he looked at Abel's life and was like, I'm going to take the place of God and say, you need to go.
So
you don't deserve to live.
How about another flip side? So let's say it's flipped here and someone's mad at you and you're in danger of ending up in Gehenna because they're mad at you and they're coming to kill you. If you go reconcile with them, maybe they won't kill you.
Why would I be going to Gehenna if someone's...
Because they're mad at you. And
they're the ones going to Gehenna. They will suffer. So think about...
I understand, but if you're not willing to forgive, or if either party's not willing to forgive, or they don't offer forgiveness, and someone's brewing something against you, you're now at risk of Gehenna.
Well, yes.
Because they hate you.
If you don't forgive...
If they aren't willing to reconcile either, that's why both parties need to be on board with this.
But yes,
because you could also end up in Gehenna.
But if the other party is not cooperating, you're not held to their uncooperative nature. You're not going to suffer Gehenna because someone else is unwilling.
Yeah, not according
to your
this
own
scripture or story, but I'm talking about in real life. If you have someone that's after you and they hate you and you're unable to reconcile with them, you have to understand that you're at risk. If that hatred grows enough in their heart, you're at risk of being murdered.
Right, but you can't use the word Gehenna there because the symbolism that's being used for Gehenna is divine judgment. So I wouldn't be, if I'm the victim of that type of contempt and hatred, that's not Gehenna. That's murder.
So is it divine judgment or is it just a byproduct of what happens?
It's both, because like I said, it's the golden rule. Do to others as you would have them do unto you. And I'm going to do my own, like, this is Andrea 1:1. Therefore, whatever you do to others will happen to you. And Jesus talks about this even in the context of forgiveness. In the Lord's Prayer, we're going to ask God for forgiveness. But if we don't forgive our brothers and sisters, God will not forgive us. And we're going to dive into exactly what that means. But it's the same concept. It's how do you expect to receive something that you don't give? To receive, you must give. You give and you receive. It is a law created by God. So if you're going to sow contempt, do not be surprised when that reverses on you. If you're going to set someone on fire, if you're going to sacrifice a person's life, let's use the Gehenna analogy, right? If you're going to set someone, punish them, put them through hell in fire, don't be surprised when your life ends that same way, because you will be judged to the degree of which you judge.
Yeah, that's good.
That's basically what Jesus is saying. It's all connected. And this is why the Sermon on the Mount is so important to read all together, because truly everything is connected. It's tied together, and it helps you understand what Jesus was really trying to say. At the bottom of it all, it's about the heart.
Yeah.
It's about your intention.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good for you. You haven't murdered anyone. Great. But how many lives have you destroyed with your words, with your actions, with your contempt, with your judgments, shaming people This is why I don't like to shame people publicly, even other ministers, because you don't know a lot of times. And I think, that's a whole topic in itself, but we have to be careful, because to the degree of what you judge, you will be judged. That's why Jesus says, just don't judge. That's a hard pill to swallow too, but it's all connected. So I think today, what we learn from this passage, the ultimate objective of what Jesus is saying is, what you do to others, the words you speak, the things you say, the intentions of your heart will determine whether you're giving someone life or whether you're taking their life away. And if you're taking their life away, there are severe consequences. Yeah. And just like he said, you don't need to fear men who can take your life. You need to fear me. You need to fear the one who can I think, doesn't he say like, who can end your life and throw you into Gehenna? I think that's what he says.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you need to fear the one who will send you to Gehenna.
Yep.
And that ties back to Jeremiah. See how it's all connected? Is crazy.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
There's a lot more to it. We could spend 10 podcasts on that.
So I think that will end today's podcast here.
Okay.
I think there's enough for people to chew on. I will put all of the show notes in, all the references that we've made in the show notes. I'll try to be as comprehensive as possible for those of you who just love to study the Bible, if you're a Bible geek like me. And speaking of, if you are a Bible geek and you love to wear Bible gear, let me just show you guys my shirt. So I'm going to just plug writteninspired.com here. This is a Bible shirt. It's the word Bible is created by all the different books of the Bible. He has the Bible Geek shirt as well.
What is the name of the site?
Written Inspired, and I'll put a link too for you guys. He's also coming out with a new shirt. I forgot what it says, but it's about studying the Bible. Totally appropriate for me because I love the Bible.
writteninspired.com.
Writteninspired.com by our friend Rod. And we will have the shirt soon so that we can show you what it's like. But we really encourage you to head out there. If you're a Bible geek like me, his gear is awesome. The shirts feel great. They feel great. They're very comfortable. They're not thick. They're just super great. Great for working out. Great for like dressing up. Great for everything. So totally awesome. He also has a gym bag that can be personalized with your name on it. So definitely something you should go check out. The other thing I want to mention is for you ladies out there, January 1st, we are starting a pop-up podcast on January 1st, where we will be going through 31 days in Proverbs 31, where we're going to deep dive into the character traits of the Proverbs 31 woman, also known as the virtuous woman. So each day there will be a 5 to 7-ish minute podcast devotional that you can listen to, and there's a private Facebook group. So I'll put the details in the show notes as well if that's something that you're interested in. I highly encourage you to do it. It's a great way for you to start your day. I'll be posting more about it coming up soon. And then also go over to andreajohn.com/resources, and you can see all the different books and gear I have. I also have some products. This is one of my hats that I have on the shop, and I have other hats as well. One of them has a lion and stuff for the In His Image book. So go out there and check it out. If you love our podcast, please like, subscribe, and share. Also, leave us a review, because the more you interact, leave comments and things like that, it really helps the algorithm get this out to people who are looking for content like this. So we appreciate your support. We want to hear more from you. Let us know your comments below. If you have a question, I know we covered some heavy topics today, something you may have never heard. If you have questions, you can comment, but you can also email hello@andreajohn.com. Reach out on my social media platforms if you want a private message instead of put it publicly. But we really appreciate your support. We hope that you're being blessed by this. And if you are, someone else may. So don't forget to share. So until next week, guys.
And we have next week we can talk about things like adultery, divorce, plucking
that's up
eyes
for next
out.
Week.
And it
Cutting
should be
your
gonna be
arm
fun.
off.
We can talk about whether your marriage is legitimate or not, if you've been divorced before. So that's going to be fun, what Jesus has to say about that. So,
so that's next. Like, we're going to talk about lust and adultery and divorce. So we'll kind of lump all those together into one.
And more hell, too, by the way. So we'll talk about that.
Hell's a popular place.
Mm-hmm.
Wide is the gate that leads to destruction, Jesus says. All right, guys, until next week, stay on the narrow gate. It's the way to go. Bye.